hates PG-13 movies. I am the Reverend in Fuego. If you're local, I work with KISW 99.9 in Seattle up here with BJ and Migs in the morning. I love horror. I've been coming to Crypticon since they were doing the itty-bitty shows up at the Seattle, the Science Center. And let's start off with some introductions, going just down the line.
My name is Charlie Kruger. I'm an author and a critic for horrorpunks.com, and I'm actually super pro PG-13 horror.
Excellent.
I'm Adrianna Angel. I work at Stalker Farms Haunted Attractions as the lead makeup artist, and I'm also pro PG-13.
I'm Stephen Gray. I'm the artistic director and talent director at Stalker Farms, and I think that PG has things to offer.
Hi, I'm Danny Knightmare, and I'm a horror addict. I have a show called Horror Addicts on YouTube, and I've grown up just watching horror movies since I was a kid. Love them.
I'm Haley Knight. I write for Watch Play Read. I'm also Gory movie on Horror Addicts.
So I think the first thing we need to start off with is what does PG-13 mean to you guys? What emotion does it respond when regarding to horror movies? If you see something like, I mean, this week, Poltergeist is out today, and it's PG-13, and some people are, I mean, even though the original was PG, some people are still stomping their feet because it's not an R-rated horror.
There's going to be no boobs.
Well, that's not entirely true, though. That's not entirely true. The Quiet Ones has boobs. And that's PG-13.
Our boob expert has
Yeah, you can tell you
Our
all
resident
Let me
Mr.
skip.
About
all
some
the
boobs.
movies.
No, I think that when people get really pissed off about PG-13 horror, what they're actually saying is that the parts of horror they enjoy aren't going to be in the films. And that's just, like, for me, the things that scare me most aren't necessarily bloody breasts, though that's not something I'm always psyched about. You know, like those, they can, be scary. But like, yeah, Gremlins is like PG, I think.
Yeah, it was one of the originals that kind of made them push towards that because it was Gremlins, Temple of Doom, and then also Poltergeist. Because I was just reading about it today. Steven Spielberg was like, I don't make R-rated movies, and so he pushed for that, and that's why they came. Well, it's not for children.
PG-13.
It's not PG, so they had to create PG-13 to fill that role.
Have
Right.
Nazis' faces melting off. It's fine.
Exactly.
Especially because they're Nazis, of course. But yeah, I mean, but that way kids can kind of see it, but it's not for them.
I think it's because they rate higher for the nudity and, the sex and the language more so than horrific images. I remember when The Ring and The Grudge came out, everybody was like, it was so terrifying, especially people who were 14 were like, oh, I can go see this. And then, they can't sleep for a month.
As a
It's
society,
on PG-13.
as our society, we don't actually care even if there's horrific images so much on television, as long as there's no nudity and naughty words.
Right.
I think
Yeah.
even South Park.
Yeah,
said
like
that.
Apple TV 14. Like,
Well, yeah, I mean, like Law and Order SVU proposes the most heinous extremes of like the human grotesque medium.
yeah.
Like weekly, it's just every other episode is just like, well, and then he was wearing her vagina on his head. or like this guy raped 47 babies. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's just like Ice-T is gonna hit him, and like and it's perfectly fine on television. So like yeah, PG-13, I think. To get pissed that like the Poltergeist remake is a PG-13 or that some other that like Let the Right One In or whatever is not going to be it's not hard is misinformed. Like you can be really scared by something really simple and like it doesn't need to be over the top to be effective. Like I am a tattoo bearing Goosebumps fan.
Yeah.
And so like yeah I grew up reading Goosebumps books and like now as a 20-something when I go back and look at them.
I read them to my kid now. So.
But yeah, like now I look at them like they don't scare me, obviously, because like I'm slightly more adjusted. But like at the same time, that is a great stepping stone. I think that to chastise PG-13 horror as not real horror or as weak or whatever is missing the point of where it stands in people's development. Like not everyone can sneak into an R-rated film. It's way easier to sneak into a PG-13 film when you're a kid.
I always will be honest that I get immediately disappointed when I hear this it's going to be PG-13, especially when I'm looking forward to something and they're like, it's going to be PG-13. I'm like,
I do now.
Man.
I used to not.
Yeah.
Monster Squad was like a great movie, PG-13. A lot of them got away with it back then, and they were still really good movies, and they can still be now. It's just harder, I think. But to quote actually Bruce Campbell, he says there is no such thing as PG-13 horror. And I kind of agree with that in a horror sense, but that doesn't mean there's not PG-13 scary, and there's not PG-13 thriller, and there's not PG-13 suspense. It just, maybe nothing in a PG-13 maybe horrified me, but then again, those ones leave the more horrifying stuff to my imagination.
And that's why I enjoy them. So like, it's just, you kind of sign up for a different experience.
Right.
Like working in the haunted house, like we're a PG-13 haunted house. That's what we say we are. And so you go from, that's the kind of experience you're really going to be experiencing. You're going to not have cursing, you're not going to have people throwing their tits in your face, like you're not going to have these aspects. And so it's just a different experience. If you're going to go see a PG-13 movie, yeah, you're not going to see maybe the level of violence that you were maybe hoping for, or, you know, just anything that comes with a radar film. But you're probably going to get some of those eerie scenes. Where you're going to, yeah, I mean,
There are movies that have just hella disappointed me when they're
Yes.
announced as PG-13 because I just don't think it fit. Like the RoboCop remake.
Oh,
Yes.
that has been the biggest one
It has
lately
not.
was Deadpool.
Yeah.
Like they finally admitted it's going to be R now with the whole April 1st like commercial they did, but for the longest time they were like, it's PG-13, and everybody was like, oh, Deadpool cannot be PG-13.
When RoboCop was announced as being remade, I was furious, and then when I found out that asshole who played Rorschach and Freddy was in the movie, I was even more angry. And in fact, I got banned from Facebook for 24 hours by tagging Jackie Earle Haley in a post saying, if I had the chance to shoot through my own chest to hit you, I would.
That's why I haven't seen the new RoboCop. 'Cause
Well, it's deplorable that it exists, because like the whole point of RoboCop, I mean, aside from like the man machine, like fascism being evil, you know, facet of the film, was like just this over the top violence and just complete inhuman cruelty. You know, that to have all that removed and be like, no, he's gonna fight robots the whole time.
Yeah, you're losing the experience by making it PG-13. But like Poltergeist, I mean, to this day, one of the scariest moments I've ever had watching a movie is I was watching Poltergeist by myself in the dark. I was like 9, watched it to the end of the credits, and there's children laughing at the end, and that is the most scared I think I've ever been in my entire life. And that's a PG-13 experience. So, I mean, I don't think you're losing that with the remake of Poltergeist. I mean, it just kind of depends on the movie.
But like we said, it was PG to begin with.
Exactly.
So, and as this one, the only thing I can really say is that clown looks creepy. It does. So,
Yes.
If anything, it's got a creepy clown.
Wait,
Here's our
question?
So what about the fact that that could introduce people to the fact, like the younger generation, to better movies?
So yeah, how do you guys feel about that as being a stepping stone? Do you feel
I
that it's
agree it
completely
is.
acceptable in those
Yeah.
sort of terms? Now, at that point, what age would you be cool? Say you have a son, daughter, niece, nephew, one of those things. What is acceptable for you guys? Because as when I was, I don't know, probably a 7 or 8 or so, I was experienced to Nightmare on Elm Street 1 and 2, which now I feel, oh yeah, that's perfectly acceptable for me. I'm a totally normal, adjusted person. And so it seems to be that, I mean, obviously depending on the maturity of the child, but where's kind of a barometer that you feel that would be a good way to start leading them down those roads?
Like you said, it's the maturity of the child. I grew up on horror movies myself. My mom read me Cujo in the 1st grade, and I was totally into that. I didn't get the adultery stuff. I was like, killer dog, I'm with you, mother. But my son started with Scooby-Doo. He loves the mystery. My mom got him watching Bones, which, again, he's into the mystery, but he's a lot more sensitive, a lot more immature. He can't handle like people dying and stuff, but he's rated to be Goosebumps. And so it just depends on the child. You know, I was watching things that were pretty graphic at a younger age, but it didn't affect me negatively. I was enjoying the story. And he's having the same experience, but he's starting with more of the PG-13 stuff. He knows his own limits.
When I grew up, my mom only had illegal channels. He legally had them. Those are the only thing on them. So, and she didn't monitor what I did really. So it was very inappropriate watching at a very young age. One of my first memories are Friday the 13th and stuff. But, and I don't know. I handled it. I think some kids can, some can't. Our kid, we
My
just give him
son,
what he can handle.
Right.
But he's a part of our horror.
our
act
son
show,
right
and
now,
he loves horror in a sense.
his
but-
big obsession right now is Five Nights at Freddy's. He's played numerous times. He is too terrified to play the games, but he is an expert. He's watched every YouTube video, every theory. He even came up to me the other day and he's like, Mom, let's talk about Nightmare on Elm Street, because I think that has something to do with an Easter egg in this
Freddy.
Freddy Fazbear game. And we talked about the whole thing, but I think if you have a good open dialogue with your child and you understand what it is exactly that scares them to the point where it's not enjoyable,
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just
Content
having
as well.
that communication.
There's a
with
lot
the
of
kid.
age-appropriate horror, which is
Yeah.
nice. And I mean, there's stuff like Paranorman that you can show to little kids too, you know, to get them excited or into it if that's what they like.
It's so old school, I guess it didn't
Monster
bother him.
House.
He saw the ending of
Frank
Friday the
Wayne.
13th and it didn't bother him, even with the hairy hands and her head getting cut off. But he walked in one time and just a glimpse of Milo
Yeah,
and he
Milo.
ran screaming.
He's
It's
traumatized.
a little animatronic puppet thing, but
So also to that end, how do you guys feel about whether or not PG-13, what it meant back when it was, the reason they had to make it was so they didn't have to give it an R rating as to opposed now? Do you feel that there's been kind of diminishing returns on a PG-13 where you're not so worried to have someone, a younger person go see a more recent PG-13 movie?
yeah, I don't think I was worried as much. I think more back, I personally liked it back then more, when PG-13 kind of meant something a little more, but now it's safer, I would say, for children.
I think the PG-13 is nice for teenagers because when you're 16, you are not afraid of most of the rated R movies, and that gives you an opportunity to go have that experience at the theater. But again, for kids, I mean, as a parent, I'm gonna watch it first because regardless of the rating, there's rated R movies that I don't see why they're inappropriate for my child to watch. My son can watch The Breakfast Club; it's rated R.
Is it really? Language.
Language, yeah.
And that's one of the other things, I mean, with, there's a lot of people who kind of make the argument that R-rated horror is just so they can have the language, you know, the boobs and the gore.
Extra gore, yeah.
Yeah, extra gore. But it also seems to me that you don't necessarily need that gore all the time. And that's one of the better ways to get, even not even younger kids, but people who aren't maybe necessarily into horror, they can get it without being just grossed out all the time.
Plus, we can watch it with him without it getting awkward.
Yeah.
Certain movies you just don't want to watch with your parents. That's awkward.
The strangest things that I had was my stepfather took me to go see Dream Warriors on Elm Street 3 in the theaters, and I was maybe double digits, maybe not even at that point. And the only thing that he covered my eyes of were for the boobs. The kid getting marionetted by his tendons. No, that's perfectly
Horrific
fine.
image that happens all the time.
Yeah, like all of these things, and then, you know, yeah,
Back in
female
the
form was the one
society
thing that he
those.
covered my eyes with, so again, I might be a little biased.
Puritanical country.
I mean, I saw movies
Don't see a
like
nipple.
way before I was supposed to growing up. Like, I mean, I had a dad who really liked horror films, so when I was with him or when I got to spend time with him, like he was like, we're watching this, and I would be petrified. Like I was like 7 when he made me watch Psycho, and then he made me take a shower.
Explain now.
Yeah.
Did he watch you? It's like homework.
Well, and when I told him, I was like 7 years old. I'm like, no, you're gonna kick open the door and yell at me. That's 7-year-old Charlie. And he was just like, no, it'll be fine. And I'm like, no, I know you. You know. I was like, no, blah, blah, blah. And like, so I'm in the shower naked, like knowing that hell is about to come. I'm just like, this is about to be awful. I don't know why I'm. Oh, there it is. You know. And like, he kicked in the door. He's like I saw horrible movies, like the most, you know. But I also, you know, grew up in a really gnarly area, you know, and so like I just saw shitty things happen in real life, and then I saw them in movies. And I mean, I think other than the fact that like I deal with some extreme self-loathing from time to time, I think I'm a vaguely well-adjusted guy. You know, and I mean, I don't have kids, which I guess is part of my well-adjusted thing. But like, if I were to, I mean, I don't care about the ratings. So that, like, the MPAA can't tell me what a movie should be seen as, you know.
Yeah.
And so like the idea of banking on ratings when like it's been established time in and time out that there's a political game behind them.
Have you seen the documentary, this film,
Yeah,
Not Yet
Not
Ready?
Yet
Ready.
Yeah.
Yeah, like, you know,
It
like,
explains how they are very biased.
Yeah,
how they rate stuff.
I got to watch whatever I wanted. I got to be really good friends with the guys who worked at the West Coast Video, which was a smaller, large chain of like video rental stores, you know, back east where I was growing up. But like, I mean, I got to know the guys there because they were a bunch of tattooed weirdos and losers who were like 25 and working in the video store.
Yeah.
So like 8-year-old Charlie was just like, I want that one, you know, and they're like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah,
you know,
take
so
it
like,
home.
I was watching movies alone that I shouldn't have been seeing, and I haven't killed anyone. So, but you know, like I think that kids should be able to watch whatever the hell they want, and if it terrifies them, then it's the job of the parent to
Yeah.
explain why it's so scary.
Yeah.
What do you guys feel about a movie like Alien vs. Predator, where Alien's rated R, Predator's rated R, and yet Alien vs. Predator is PG?
I think that's why they made up for it in the sequel. We were actually talking about that in the panelist room just a second ago.
Yeah, I mean, Alien vs. Predator 2, like a baby, like,
Yeah,
there's
we
the
were
pregnant
just
woman
talking
scene,
about
but
that.
then there's the hunting scene.
Yeah.
Where the
Little
the kid chestburster in front of his dad, and then the dad's arm melts off. And
The
it's
R
just
was
like,
for Requiem, but I think they just wanted you to know R.
that's-
We're sorry, R.
Yeah, that's a triple down where they're like, we're really sorry. I know we had Lance Hendrickson, but kids dying in front of their family. And, and you had people being
and
like,
then to see where the
cool.
dad dies fighting the predator in the kid's room.
Just ripped apart,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's just like,
That's the second one, right?
Yeah.
We were talking about baby steps, and it's really funny that you mentioned that particular movie because my son for Christmas got me a stuffed xenomorph, and I was like, okay, this is where
Good
xenomorphs
kid.
come
Doing it right.
from. Start off as face huggers, the whole cycle, you know, the talking everything. And
birds and the bees.
absolutely. And
he would have a special.
he
Can't break
wanted to
it.
see them in action, and I know he's a little too sensitive to be watching the action in, and certainly the Predator films. But I was like, hey, Alien vs. Predator, nothing happens in that. So we watched it together, and he actually said,
They talk about Matt right here.
Just turned off the
Well, and that's-
theatrical version.
And that's one of the problems that you have with, I think, Hollywood at that point, is because they see these franchises and there's a significant amount of less money in
Yeah.
the R-rated movies
wanna pack
because
the seats.
it's like anyone that's 17 and under technically can't get in unless their parents, and most of the time your parents are either going to drop you off because they don't want to watch the crap that you're watching, or they're not going to want to even go with you in a movie. So that's the reason why I think they did that with Predator,
Yeah.
is because they thought that maybe they could get a bigger share, and then the make 'em up was when they realized that
They
the
did
only
not.
money they're going to get from it are the people who love the
The
R-rated
fans were
ones.
pissed, so.
Yeah.
And then it bites people in the ass because I do a movie podcast and we just talked about the Carrie comparisons, and the new Carrie got an R rating, and that's not an R. It's not an R. You watch it and you're like, this is barely PG-13. Like the Carrie in '76, like it's because of the female nudity at the beginning and the strange male gaze that happens for like the first 10 minutes. I haven't watched that movie in years, and I was like, this is a little. Did Roman Polanski direct this? What's going on? But like you could tell, that studio heads were like, God, PG-13, PG-13, and they got an R back, and they're like, fuck, fuck. And I worked in a movie theater, and kids didn't care. Like they were like, yeah, I want to go watch The Last Airbender, and then they, the money, granted, it's going to The Last Airbender, but they still got in. So it is the atmosphere has completely changed in terms of like. Even from 20 years ago, let alone 30 to 45 years ago, like part of the whole horror trope, everything was to push back against the moral majority, to be like, look at all these horrible things. Our parents think it's horrible and it's disgusting, and now like we all laugh at those. Sorry if anyone here is like Christian fundamentalists in this room, but we all laugh at those people. We're like, you're fucking crazy. Like this is an art form, and we all really enjoy it. So like the whole, everything has changed. The only thing that's still there is money. And that's why remakes get made, because it's a guaranteed cash cow, and they will strive for them to be PG-13 because it's more asses and seats. It's just little, like you said, Hannibal, which is TV-14, is horrifically graphic, and it's on television.
NBC.
So it's just still sex.
They're very biased on how they rate them.
I think if you want to see the movie, you're gonna see it. I watched tons of R-rated movies and stuff when I was a little kid, and for me as a child, like it being R-rated, it's like, oh, this is a little, I'm a big girl. I can watch Day of the Dead. I watched 5 minutes of it and went upstairs, but I could because it was on.
I think
VHS.
that part of the response, like the snapback to the glittery vampire, like the marvelization of horror that's gone on in the past however many years. But I think everyone always complains about the weenie of horror because it's not as scary as when they were 7. But like, no, I think part of like the response to that is that at the same time, those like unrated special editions that come out of every bad Dimension film. If Dimension Films is listening on that podcast, please don't stop sending me free movies. Like you can, but like no, I mean, like it's point. Like the remake of The Hitcher is like watching sausages get made. Like there's no reason for it, and it's a shit film. Whereas the original Hitcher is one of like my favorite homoerotic killer films. Just like hands down, Pony Boy and
Rutger Hauer.
Yeah, I was trying to think of
Roy
his
Batty.
name from, Roy Batty.
There you go, there's
Thank you.
Someone knows it.
We got he should be up here instead of me. So that's a rad movie. And I think the grossest scene we get is the French fry finger scene. And that's something that, like, even Tales from the Crypt would have made fun of.
Right.
And so I think that, the snapback of making things violent or gory for the sake of it, like to have the unrated DVD, is pointless, because it does nothing for me, at least. Whereas I love, Herschel Gordon Lewis. I'll watch people splashing around in ketchup all day. But like, if you're just adding a scene where people are splatting, it's like when they would add hardcore scenes to like softcore porn films. Like all of a sudden, what used to be like an erotica film, like what used to be an Emmanuel movie, has like this like non-stop anal scene for 10 minutes, and then it goes back to like kind of like like exploitationist roaming the countryside, Rochelle. I don't need to have 14 minutes of Bodil doing a horse in the middle for no reason. Like it doesn't help.
Make it unrated.
47 hours of that guy fisting horses. No one's
What have you done? Okay.
just let it go.
I just don't want to watch this.
I need more porn.
So you brought up the sparkly vampires, and I mean, it is part of the name of the panel. But I mean, they're like the Twilight films. Any of those, I avoided all of those. I even avoided even as much as I love zombies, and that it got a good couple of good reviews from some of my friends, was Warm Bodies. It was one of those that I completely avoided. Do you feel that those sort of movies spell the doom of horror?
I think people know the difference. People who love horror aren't
They're
worried
paranormal
about
romance. They're not horror. They're not intended to scare you. They're intended to make you all, I don't know, warm in your underreaches.
Warm Bodies especially owns its cheesy plot and stuff. That's kind of why it was alright. It's just like, they know it's just silly and then they own it.
As far as the sparkly vampires goes, Anne Rice did it first. In Queen of the Damned, she describes them having marble-like,
And the
sparkly
moon.
skin, and nobody gives her crap.
Nobody.
I give Anne Rice a lot of crap.
Maybe some
Yeah.
teenage girls are confused between like the Lost Boys and Edward, but
Yeah.
I know the difference. And
We
I
had
don't-
wussified vampires way before
I
Twilight.
don't
You see
think
the
that
quaff
teenage
on Dracula in the
girls-
remake?
I think that teenage girls know very well that what they're watching when they watch Twilight.
They're
is
not watching to
horror.
be scared, so
Yeah.
it's not horror.
They're watching hot vampire boy and hot werewolf boy. Like,
I just wanted to touch on that real fast. That has been my one problem with the pushback to the Twilight stuff, is this sort of like, albeit Twilight is a horrible representation of budding female sexuality, and I will say that because fuck, oh my god, yes. But I still was annoyed where it's still, I'm sorry, my feminist is gonna come out, but it was just like, oh look, like here's an avenue for some girls and we're gonna continue to shit on it. Like, and that's my kind of like, well come on man, like, and people are like, well there's all this other good stuff. Like, I understand there's all this other good stuff, but you remember when you were 13 and when adults were like, that's stupid, and you were like, there were some of you that were like, fuck it, we're gonna see it anyway. But there was also, and I was one of these, a little fat kid that was like, when adults were like, that's stupid, I was like, oh, okay, like I was a big-hearted little kid, and so like, it annoyed me where it's like, yes, I do have a problem with the vampires and how it's been kind of commodified, and that is a big problem. But at the same time, I'm like, I think it's worth talking about, where it's like, let's utilize this avenue and be like, well, what is the vampire sweetheart?
Because it's in our backyard, I actually went to Forks during the whole height of the Twilight stuff, and it was just astounding to me that this whole town was transformed by fiction. Someone had an idea, it transformed, gave jobs, everything, inspired people from Japan to come there touristing over a book. And it's amazing that any fiction can accomplish that. Is amazing, regardless what you think of that particular book or movie.
Well, I mean, like, Twilight is Harry Potter, and Harry Potter is the Goosebumps books, and the Goosebumps books are the Fear Street books, and those are the Ian Fleming books, and those are the Conan books, and it's all something. It's all something that exists to get people who don't normally read. I mean, like, I'm a huge Goosebumps fan, and I'm even gonna watch the movie with Jack Black in it. But like, I'm a huge Goosebumps fan, but like, I didn't read for a long time, and then I read The Phantom of the Auditorium, and I was like, this is the coolest thing that's ever happened. I'm gonna recreate this moment every time I can. And then 62 books later, I read something else. But like, I think that's that's what Twilight does for a bunch of people who aren't me. And I think that a lot of people who shit talk Twilight are also huge Harry Potter fans. And Harry Potter sucks.
Yeah.
But it got little kids and older people reading the same book I am, right?
No, not Harry Potter, and it's because the Goosebumps books, at their base are kids' books. And the Harry Potter books are kids' books. They're just incredibly fat kids' books.
Yeah.
Not for fat kids, but
Normally wouldn't be
Neville
reading
is not
about
the
wizards and
representation of
stuff,
the
or
reading.
about wizards.
But yeah, and so these are books that exist to get people reading who wouldn't normally read. And so the film versions are there to bring people into a world. So I had a roommate who had a girlfriend, who was super into the Twilight books. And she was just like, oh, they're so good, and then she bought all the movies. And she was like, I want to watch them. And he was like, I'm not doing that. And I figured, well, I don't pay very much in rent, so I have to do something nice back. So I watched the Twilight films with her. And they're movies. They are moving pictures. They
Lots of stairs.
They cost
Lots of
money to make.
stairs.
There's trees. There's
people in 'em.
lots of shirtless, nubile men.
Just watch the
which
Cinema
was,
Sins version.
not
With
great.
airbrushed abs.
Yeah, lots of let's cut that out. You don't have the testosterone to form those muscles.
Right.
It's ridiculous. You're 8. I watch them and they're bad, but they're bad movies that I can see people loving. The same way that the Harry Potter films are bad movies that people love.
And as horror fans, we've got
And
to
the Star Wars.
because
Yeah,
as horror fans, we get, I've heard so many times that there's no good movies in the horror genre. It's all cheap crap, and it's all just gore. There's some brilliant movies in horror, and I personally think more of the creative stuff that's coming out is in the horror genre, but it's so easily written off. They never get mentioned for best movie of the year or anything like that, and so I sympathize in that respect to what the Twilight girls are going through. And also, as a huge fan of Buffy, I've also been mocked many times, and that series, say what you will about it, it changed my life. That was my biggest inspiration.
Their vampires were violent and killed people, so I'm like,
If they did that, if Twilight did that for teenage girls, and it's having them go out there and read or create or inspiring them to put things out in the world that I might like, then more power to it.
If it's an avenue for people, then I think it can be explain the same thing with pardon me, but 50 Shades of Grey, which I'm doing the panel tonight, isn't it? But if you could be you just want to grab and be I love this, or same time I'd be okay, that's awesome. You're this is really cool. Let me give you this and this and this and this and this, and that's my problem with the people, because people will shit on Twilight, but then they won't go to the next level. It's okay, if you got a problem, then talk to those people and find a common ground. And all of us here are enthusiasts, and one of our biggest problems, not all of us, but some of us, is trying to find a common ground where it's fuck you, no, Freddy 2 is amazing, even with the gay subtext,
Especially
subtext here and all that. But it's as artists or as an audience member, or as us, we have to learn to give parts of ourselves when new people come in and be hey, awesome, this is what you like. Here's what got me into what you like. Part of me is instantly when you're Harry Potter sucks, I'm motherfucker, and I'm okay. It is.
No, I'm a tattoo-bearing Lost Boys fan as well. And the Lost Boys are
Sexy.
sparkling vampires.
Sorry.
That's when we get down to it. David is he's Martin Gore.